Hello friends and welcome to the EPG Pathshala. I am Nilofer Bharucha, adjunct faculty in the Department of English and director and scientist in charge of COHAB IDC, which is the Constructions of Home and Belonging Indian Diaspora Center. Today I am going to talk to you about films made by the Indian diasporics, i.e. diasporic filmmaking. This is a very new area. Diasporics have been writing literature for over 100 years now, but it's only towards the end of the last century, the 20th century, that diasporics have started making films and started projecting themselves to the world. They have been imaging themselves to the world as well as imaging India, or rather re-imaging India to the world. This is a very interesting field and it has generated a lot of interest among academics. What is also interesting is the fact that the locations from where this diasporic filmmaking is coming are the post-colonial diasporic locations. These filmmakers are not coming from the old diaspora, from the colonial diaspora. They are coming from the post-colonial diaspora. They are coming from the post-colonial professional diasporas. So we'll be looking at a history of this filmmaking, looking at the different locations from where the films are coming, and we'll also look at a couple of filmmakers themselves. The earliest examples of films made by Indian diasporics comes to us from the UK. Given the long history of the Indian diaspora in Britain, this is not a surprising development. Label Asians or South Asians, persons of Indian subcontinental origins, form 4% of the British population. These include descendants of the early immigrants, who are called the first wave, the early 20th century migrants, called the second wave, and the post-war immigrants, the third wave. The third wave can be further subcategorized into labor and professional. By the 1960s, there was resentment among white Britons, especially of the working classes, against what was called the blackening of Britain. This gave rise to overt racism fanned by right-wing extremist leaders such as Enoch Powell and his infamous Rivers of Blood speech in Birmingham in April 1968. These developments politicize the black British youth who embraced a black identity. Not so the Asians, who remain the more passive recipients of white racism. However, some Asian youth did become sensitized to political and cultural resistance against racism and embrace the general black identity. Yet it was black British culture, especially music, which impacted strongly upon mainstream British society, and Asian culture did not develop its distinct identity until the 1980s and 1990s with what was called the Bhangra rap and hip-hop. Given this historical and socio-cultural context, it is not surprising that Asian cinema in Britain was rooted in the black politics of the 1960s. Like the black British filmmakers, Asian filmmakers too felt the need to challenge racism and assert their distinct identity and present new images of British society. Asian filmmakers began to emerge in the 1970s, and their films depicted identity confusion and challenge racism. The first feature film foregrounding Asians in Britain was published by the British Film Institute and co-written by Peter Smith and Dilip Hero. It was called A Private Enterprise and was released in 1975. It was about a university graduate who wants to start a business in Birmingham and charts his travails and triumphs. It was directed by Peter Smith, who cannot technically be counted as a diasporic Indian film, though it was based on the Indian diaspora and depicted identity confusion and challenged racism. Another important British Asian filmmaker is Hanif Qureshi. Though from Pakistan, he needs to be included here, not only because in Britain the diaspora from the Indian subcontinent is treated in a holistic manner and includes Pakistan and Bangladesh, but because his films, especially My Beautiful Laundrette, which was released in 1985, also deals with an older generation of characters who lived in pre-partition India and are nostalgic not about post-colonial Pakistan, but about Bombay, which was their home before they migrated to the UK. There are also films such as Chicken Tikka Masala, released in 2005, directed by Harmaj Singh Kaliriand. Shoot on Sight 2008, directed by Jug Mundra, who had also directed the acclaimed Provoked, which had been released in 2006. Provoke was a biopic on the Asian woman who had been convicted and then freed after a heated national debate, mainly by women's groups, for the crime of having burned to death her abusive and violent husband. Kali Rai's film is about closet homosexuality and coming out, while Mundra's Shoot on Sight is about a Muslim police officer, Ali, at Scotland Yard, who had to hunt down the Muslim suspects of the 7 July 2005 London Underground bombings. In spite of himself being married to an English woman and having 2 children with her, Ali is disturbed by this assignment as it involves the shooting down of an innocent Muslim youth. This incident in the film was based on real-life shoot-to-kill orders the London Metropolitan Police were given for this assignment, hunting down the perpetrators of the 7 July bombings, and had led to the shooting down of a Brazilian on 21st July 2005 who had been mistaken for one of the terrorists. This film is thus about ethnic profiling and its tragic consequences. Gurinder Chadha, the British Asian filmmaker best known for her internationally successful blockbuster film Bend It Like Beckham, which was released in 2002, is a double diasporic, as her trajectory to the UK has been via the East African diaspora in Kenya. With the funding of multicultural arts by Britain in the 1980s, Asian filmmakers began to explore multicultural Britain and more mainstream themes. Gurinder Chadha's first feature film, Bhaji on the Beach, released in 1993, was about a group of Asian women on a day trip to Blackpool. Interwoven into the cinematic narrative are themes of identity confusion and assertion of sexuality among the young women and loneliness, alienation and fantasy among the older women. This is a road movie where each woman on this trip is also on a voyage of self-discovery. It is one of Chadha's more ideologically informed cinematic texts. Bend It Like Beckham, which was released in 2002, is so far Chadha's most globally successful films, which even launched the career of one of Hollywood's current icons, Keira Knightley, in her role as Juliet Paxton. In the film, however, is Jasminder Bhamra, played by Parminder Nagra, who is the main protagonist as she battles patriarchal expectations at home and racism on the football field. The global success of this film have led critics to ask whether Asian films are now moving towards the mainstream by working into their discourses elements which would appeal to a wider audience. Both Jess and Jules have to deal with different forms of female stereotypes at their homes. The Bhamras want their daughter to go to university and study, a typical Indian middle-class mindset whose aspirations for their daughters now include higher education, as this is more and more the requirement of the marriage market. Football is anathema to them, as it is not feminine, and also, in the words of Mrs. Bhamra, immodest, as the girls have to wear shorts and thus display their legs. Mr. Bhamra, Jess being part of a multiracial football team, brings back nightmarish memories of how he was racially discriminated against as a cricketer in colonial Kenya. He is afraid his daughter would have to face the same kind of racism, and this she does. However, the Irish coach of the girls' football team seems to offer a rather pat answer to Jess when she brings up the issue of racism by saying that he knows all about it too, as he is Irish. Chadha, as an Asian in Britain, should know better than comparing national-level discrimination, as with the Irish in Britain, with actual racism based on the colour of one's skin, which is what Mr. Bhamra and Jess have to deal with. In Bride and Prejudice, released in 2004, also shot in Hindi as Balle Balle Amritsar to LA, released in 2004 itself, is in the tradition of post-colonial writers of filmmakers rewriting colonial canonical texts, in this case Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. What post-colonial writers and filmmakers do is appropriate and rewrite this canonical text from the point of view of the racial other. This thus challenges and resists the stereotypes and racist discourse available in these texts. This film is also the most Bollywoodish of Chadda's oeuvre. Aishwarya Rai, the Bollywood star and Miss World, played the role of Lalita Bakshi in this film. Lalita is Elizabeth Bennet, and Darcy is played by New Zealand actor Martin Henderson. The music in this film is a Bollywood mixed with Hollywood musicals. While Lalita is Indian, there is a strong Indian diasporic representation in the Friends of Darcy, who represent the worst and best of this community. Lalita sets out not only to tame Darcy, but also to challenge the prejudices of the Indian diaspora. However, not all of Austen translates successfully into the Bollywoodized Chadda film, as is noted by several critics. In my opinion, the moral universe of Austen, which makes the shenanigans of Mrs. Bennet and some of her daughters understandable, are merely translated into Bollywood conservatism on all things to do with sex and sexuality. Bride and Prejudice did not do very good business either in India or in the West. It was neither a good diasporic film nor a good Bollywood film. After this film, Chadda has made several films including It's a Wonderful Afterlife, which is the theme of the Indian mother anxious to get her daughters married too. The USA, the home of Hollywood, is yet another location from where diasporic Indians have been making films from the 1980s onwards. Interestingly, many of them, like M. Night Shyamalan, mainstream films exclusively for Hollywood rather than cinematic texts that narrate the lives of diasporics in that country, or films that attempt to re-image India. Shyamalan is a writer, director and producer who is known for making hit films based on supernatural and sci-fi themes, which he has made his forte. A filmmaker whose career graph is like that of most other filmmakers from India is Meera Nair, who is today better known for films like The Namesake, which is based on the novel by the diasporic Jhumpa Lahiri, rather than for her films set centrally in India like Salaam Bombay, which was released as early as 1988. Nair has also made mainstream Hollywood films like Vanity Fair in 2004, albeit with an Indian flair. We shall look at her films in greater detail in a later section of this talk, as she is one of the best known of the diasporic Indian filmmakers in the USA today. Like the diasporic filmmakers from the UK, the ones from the USA too focus on issues of identity and racism, as well as on generation gaps between first and second generation diasporics in the USA. Here we have filmmakers like Piyush Dinkar Pandya, who made films like American Desi in 2001, Anurag Mehta with films like American Chai 2001 again, and Viral Lakhia with Namaste in 2002. These films are about the identity crisis experienced by second generation and 1.5 generation, i.e. born in India but brought up in the new homeland, and the manner in which they ultimately resolve their crises and accept both their Indian and American selves in a composite hybrid construct. With the exception of Meera Nair and of course Night Shyamalan, who have really succeeded with their albeit very different films, most of the other diasporic Indian filmmakers have not been able to go beyond their first films, which remain their only films. Obvious problems with financial backing, distribution and marketing for the small filmmaker, compounded by their ethnicity, would make it very difficult for them to continue making more films. The American cultural space still lacks the critical discourse available to Asian and black filmmakers in Britain, and which makes it more possible for them to sustain their filmmaking activities. Let us look at Meera Nair in detail now. Meera Nair began her film career with Salaam Bombay, which she made in 1988, with the scriptwriter Sunita Raporwala, who has since then collaborated with her on most of her films. Nair's depiction of street children in this film came into conflict with Indian notions of how the country and its society should be projected to the world. This is still the case even in the second decade of the 21st century. Nayar's next important film was Mississippi Masala, released in 1991, a serious cinematic text which attempted to deal with the expulsion of the Indian diaspora from Uganda during the rule of the dictator Idi Amin and their subsequent resettlement in the American South. So racism is at the heart of this film. The racism practiced against the Indian diaspora by Idi Amin and the racist reactions too of the resettled family in the USA is part of the film. The film made modest returns even though it won some international awards for Nayar and Tara Purwala, who was again the scriptwriter. This was a film with a strong agenda about the bodies of women and how patriarchy and nations try to control them. Meera's next film was Monsoon Wedding, released in 2001, and it was set mainly in India and is about a diasporic family coming to India to wed their son to an Indian girl. This was a hugely popular and truly crossover film which was made in the nuptial genre, already made popular by Hollywood films like My Big Fat Greek Wedding and My Best Friend's Wedding. This film won for Nayar huge popularity, and it also got her the Golden Lion Award at the Venice Film Festival. Mainstream audiences loved this film, and American women wanted monsoon wedding themed weddings for themselves and made these demands to their wedding planners. Underneath the gloss and fluff of the great Punjabi wedding, however, were family feuds, a lower caste romance, and child abuse. In this film, we find the usual themes of Nayar's films: center staging of the peripherals, focusing on individuals and groups marginalized by race, gender, age, caste, or economic status. The imaging and re-imaging of India and the diaspora, as well as issues of identity confusion and reconstruction. This is a film you must watch and try to identify for yourself the various themes and issues in the film. The Namesake, which was released in 2006, was based on the novel of the same name by Jhumpa Lahiri and was yet another commercial and critical success for Nayar. Meera Nayar's films focus on the relations between Ashok and Ashima Ganguly. The film shows them moving from the initial awkwardness of relationship in an arranged marriage to the affection and comfort of an old but not jaded marriage. The growth of Ashima from a dependent young wife to an independent woman at the time of her husband's sudden death is also foregrounded in the film. Nayar has a definite and interesting filmmaking style, which is evident in most of her films. She uses retro graphics and cinematic intertextuality. Her films have a dynamic and hybrid music. Traditional Indian wedding or folk songs, jazz, and Indian film music are put together in her films. To create the proper images, she often uses mood lighting and cinematic metaphors such as the bridges metaphor in The Namesake. Do look for these techniques as you watch her films. We now move to Indo-Canadian diasporic filmmaking. The Indo-Canadian filmmaking scene is in a very robust mode. Apart from the globally visible Deepa Mehta with her Elements trilogy and Bollywood Hollywood, there are many others who have directed, produced, scripted and acted in films made by Indian diasporics in Canada and or have been part of television series and also directed and scripted for Canadian TV channels. These are artists such as R. Paul Dillon, a filmmaker, actor, director and scriptwriter. There is also Agam Darshi, who has made a successful career in TV and co-founded the Vancouver International South Asian Film Festival. Nisha Ganatra is an openly lesbian filmmaker from Vancouver and has made films like Chutney Popcorn and Cosmopolitan on the issue of Indian diasporics' denial of their children's alternate sexuality, as a result of which these young people have to lead double lives and cannot declare themselves openly. These films are also in the mode of diasporic films on identity confusion and generation gap, which are issues between the first and subsequent generations of diasporic Canadians. In 2014, the Government of Canada signed an Indo-Canada audiovisual co-production agreement with the Indian government, which offers exciting opportunities for Indian and Canadian film producers and other stakeholders to collaborate on various aspects of filmmaking. Even before this pact came into being, there were several collaborative films between Indo-Canadians and Bollywood filmmakers. One such example is Akshay Kumar's Speedy Singh, as it was called in Hindi, and Breakaway, which was the name of the English language version, both made in 2011. There is Richie Mehta's Amal in 2007 on the life of a rickshaw driver in Mumbai, which won him many international awards. In the lead role of Amal was Rupinder Nagra, and there was also the Indian actor Naseeruddin Shah in the role of the Indian billionaire who is in search of an honest man. Vikram Dhillon, the producer, director and actor, has made Punjabi films like Ji Karda in 2013 and Pinky Mogewali in 2012. These films made by Indo-Canadian filmmakers in India about Indians are in the mode of re-imaging the nation films. Let us now talk about Deepa Mehta in detail. Deepa Mehta was born in post-colonial India in 1950. She migrated as a student to Canada, where she has lived ever since. Her filmmaking career, which began in the 1970s, gained momentum in the 1990s, and apart from her controversial and globally known Elements trilogy, Fire, released in 1996, Earth in 1998, and Water in 2005, includes films like Sam and Me, 1991, Bollywood Hollywood 2002, Heaven on Earth 2008, and Midnight's Children 2012. And this is not an exhaustive list of her films. In Earth 1947, to give the film its full title, we have very complex metaphors that begin presencing themselves from the very title shots. Here the cracked earth has boundaries drawn across, symbolizing the imminent cracking or partitioning of India. Based on Bepsi Sidhwa's novel The Ice Candy Man, published in 1988 and retitled Cracking India in 1991 for its American edition, the film sets out to re-image India from the location which is Canada and a time that is the end of the 20th century through the eyes of two women, one the filmmaker Mehta and the other the novelist Sidhwa. The cinematography of the flames that engulf the beautiful city of Lahore is symbolic of the destruction of the syncretic culture of the subcontinent. In her next film, Fire, the focus is more domestic and the time frame is post-colonial India of the 1980s. Here the fire is the one lit in the bodies of women by a society that is in denial of female sexuality. The two women in this movie are Radha, the older woman whose husband has unilaterally embraced celibacy as a mark of devotion to his guru. Sita is the wife of the younger brother of Radha's husband. This man, although married to Sita, has a Chinese Indian girlfriend. Neglected by their men, the two women gradually turn to one another, first for companionship, then for emotional support, and finally physical satisfaction. When discovered one evening by Radha's husband Ashok, the husband's male ego is hurt to an extent that when the argument he has with Radha, which happens in the kitchen, Radha's sari catches fire and he does nothing to help, Radha douses the flames herself. This is an intertextual echo of Sita of Ramayana, but with a twist. Sita had to go through an Agni Pariksha, trial by fire, to prove her chastity to her husband Ram, and yet was unable to satisfy patriarchal society's demands for proof of her innocence and had to be banished to the forest. In this film, Radha denies Ashok the satisfaction of this Agni Pariksha and leaves the house with Sita to seek happiness outside the bonds of patriarchal oppressions and enclosures. Water had a rough reception in India. After having been given initial permission to shoot in the city of Varanasi, Mehta was driven away by protests from right-wing activists who felt that this film on the lives of widows set in India of the 1930s presented a bad image of India to the world. Water was ultimately made in Sri Lanka. In this film, the nascent nation of India is metaphorically birthed across the bodies of desexed widows who are nevertheless sexually exploited by respectful and powerful men. Water, when finally made, even though not in an Indian locale, was still concerned with Mehta's central taupe of re-imaging the nation. As noted by Sridhar Rajeswaran, I quote, "The nation is central to Deepa Mehta's cinema and the making of it. It is imagined in diverse ways and located in geographies and along axes which constellate into epiphanic moments which flicker to reveal hidden secrets. Its contours are drawn from the knowledge inferred from diverse fields." Unquote. This is from an article in 2014. Do watch all these 3 films in the Elements trilogy and note the central trope of the nation building and the tracing of the national boundaries and social mores across the bodies of women. Also note the use of cinematic metaphors and technique. For instance, the use of different color, different types of shots, long, medium, close-ups, and see how they contribute to the narrative of the film. Do not neglect watching Mehta's other films too, and see how she has continued with her major concerns in these films too. In the context of diasporic tropes, you will find Sam and Me, Bollywood Hollywood, and Heaven on Earth of particular relevance as they concern themselves with identity construction and generational conflicts in the Canadian context. So friends, we have looked at the issue of films made by diasporic Indians today. We have seen how these films have made an international impact. We have seen how they were received in India. We have also seen the kind of imaging and re-imaging of the nation that has gone on in these films. I would like you to consider the kind of stereotypes you might find in these films, because even though the distance that these diasporic filmmakers have, distance in time, distance in space, could lead to objectivity, it could also lead to distortions. This again creates a problem vis-a-vis the stay-at-home Indians and the Indians in diasporics about the image of India that is to go out to the world. Enjoy these films, watch them, and come to your own conclusions.